What's up, guys? This is Hot Noob here, and this is the first episode, or rather, episode 0 for what's probably going to be called like Crash Course into IT or programming. And for the first episode, we'll just be going quickly over choosing your IT career path, which is not very straightforward at all. So let's continue through here what I've got. Obviously, the first thing you're going to be really thinking about is post-secondary education. Do you want it? So, what's great about it? Well, it sort of helps you get your first job. You're still going to run into the problem of you need experience. So, you're giving up 2 or 4 years for that. And the other pro is you are able to apply for government jobs. Now, what's bad about it? The education portion of it is mainly just regurgitation, and you don't really learn much. Um, when you come out of post-secondary, you think you know it all because you've just spent 2 to 4 years, and the school system seems to be telling people this is all you need to know. You just got to learn, you got to learn, you got to learn, and then once you get your education, your life kind of like stops there, and it's all nothing's really mentioned. But truth be told, once you're out of post-secondary, you basically know nothing, and probably wasted most of your time, but that's, whatever, people can debate that. You'll at least know something. What it comes down to is, are you going to learn faster and better on your own or in the school in this day and age or whatever? What they teach is often out of date, and in my opinion, they also teach things in the wrong order, like teaching something like C++ before something like HTML or something, easier, more visual to get in, or even worse, teaching it all at the same time, where you're learning C++ and C and C++ and everything all at the same time. It's not the way to do it. So another con is when you're in post-secondary education, your career path now becomes rigid. You, for the most part, go into a career that's sort of related to your education. At the same time, it's actually highly unlikely that you will get a job for what you actually learned in university and whatnot. And if you do get in, you're probably going to be getting into a large company and it's going to be highly bureaucratic, and your job is most likely not going to be very flexible and very rigid. Now, here is the biggest con of it, which is it is actually just a giant money grab. Most education institutions out there are all about the money. That's all they really care about. They don't care if you get a job afterwards. They don't care. They will give you false numbers. They'll say 80% of you who graduate will get a job making 6 figures and blah, 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 when the reality is quite the opposite. So, post-secondary is about money. They're not your friend. Um, Pre-secondary, just as like a side note, is actually about controlling how you think. And this becomes a problem for programming because, well, you actually have to think to program and you can't just regurgitate crap. So unlearn your regurgitation and memorization. Nothing about programming is like about memorizing. A lot of it is about, say, memorizing a lot of information for a very, very short period of time, and maybe even long term, depending on how long you're working on a project. Um, that's all going to depend on what you're programming. But you also a tip. When you're memorizing or remembering things, don't try to memorize. That's a waste of time. But when you're remembering things, you don't want to remember things exactly. You want to use like tricks and tips, partial memory, partially memorizing terms, etc. Because the tools out there will help you remember the rest, and especially Google or whatever. Things have changed quite a bit since I started. So, um, what happens if you skip post-secondary education? Well, the cons. Let's start with that. It's difficult to get your first job, really difficult. That's a no-duh because you need experience for your job and you probably also need some sort of certification. Otherwise, how are you going to prove yourself? It's just that simple. However, if you do get your first job, it's unfortunately going to be harder to move up in life. Someone who has the education will be able to move up in life without really having the skill. And you also often find that, all right, you also find that it's harder to move up in life. Academics will often treat you poorly, more poorly or whatever, because they made the investments of going to school 2 to 4 years, and your basic stages of grief starts with denial, and that's part of their denial phase, that their education was potentially useless or whatever. The other more difficult, the increased difficult, the other con is that it's more dependent on your skill. So if you want to move up after you get your first job, you're not going to be doing it through having, say, an education. You're not likely to be in a career path that will just be like, oh, we're a big company, we'll just give you a raise X. You've been here 10 years, you can do that. You've been here 5 years, you can get this new position or whatever. It's mostly going to be dependent on your skill, how well you're doing, and you're going to be constantly proving yourself to people because a lot of people are still denying or in denial about the academics of these days. Post-secondary school, it's not really about teaching these days, at least. And I mean, it's debatable even if it was about education in the first place. Anywho, works experience is often invalidated, especially by academics. So if you're applying for a position and you've been, say, doing this position for 3 or 4 years, chances are it's going to be a bit of an odd job position, odd, and academics are not likely to recognize it. So it's like they're expecting something like, oh, your support level 1, 2, 3, or whatever programmer level, yada yada, and your job position will be like, oh, I did IT stuff or programming or whatever. Or even just, well, you didn't work in like downtown or whatever, you're working for a small company, so your experience is useless or whatever. You're going to get that quite often when you apply to the larger companies, unfortunately. So that's another thing that can make things difficult for when you don't go with the academics. And the last one here, well, it depends on the kind of person you are, but you can never work for the government because the government always requires a post-secondary education, no matter your experience. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So that means you're very unlikely to get a pension, and therefore your job security may be a little worse. That can be quite a bit of a problem for you guys. But it's what it is. Now, the pros. Well, you get a head start. You save 2 to 4 years of your life. You get income now. And while you're younger, your parents are more likely to let you live at home. So you get to live at home potentially for rent for free, for with no rent. And that will save you $2,000 to $4,000 a month on living expenses. And you may even find that when you first move out, your job isn't paying you enough to survive or whatever, and you got to compromise, get roommates and all sorts of things, anything to lower your living expenses. So you can utilize those first couple of years to save up so that you can make investments or whatever, because society is a giant Ponzi scheme. Just something to keep in mind. And sometimes the people at the top die and they get old and whatnot, so there is some hope. And yeah, just good luck. Job changes. So your job is likely to be less rigid. You'll be doing more jobs or whatever. You may go from programming, you may go to support or whatever. You may go to servers. You can go all over the place. Because you're not really locked down by what your education was specialized in or whatever. You're more likely to develop real skill because in the situation where you don't have that post-secondary education, you don't have that piece of paper, the only way for you to really get up is through seniority, the Ponzi scheme, or getting better at what you do. And a great pro is you have nothing to unlearn. So when you go to post-secondary, you're going to have to unlearn most of that because a lot of that is really just bad practice. You're not thinking about the right things. You're just memorizing, regurgitating. It's unfortunate. So um, sometime in the future, it may be possible uh, that more people will start to recognize this. We'll see. So your goal throughout your career will basically be selling your soul. because you want to escape the serfdom, you want to retire, you don't want to work. Let's face it, work is not always sunshine and rainbows, and that's something you have to live with. So you're selling your life in exchange for money so that you can possibly retire sometime in the future. For you guys who are younger, well, unfortunately, you're just entering the Ponzi schemes now, and it's been going on for a couple hundred years now, maybe a couple thousand, however you want to think of it. So every year, the Ponzi scheme is going to get worse and worse, especially in with the state of government these days. So I'd say estimate you need about $2 million net worth. That's going to be including $1 million house or a $500,000 house, depending on where you live, and then $1 million of cash or assets that will provide you with enough money to cover your living expenses, food, gas, utilities, etc. So, rule of 72, really easy. That's how you're going to determine when something doubles in terms of interest with yearly compounded interest, which is what inflation is. Now, your average raise is going to be around 3% per year, and this is regardless of what position you are in or whatever. This is just average for your average person. In IT, actually, it's been stagnant, so you're probably more likely to get 1 or 2% per year of that in these days. Now, government will say our target inflation is 2%, 3%. Well, inflation is just another tax, and they're just saying we're only going to steal 2 or 3% of your savings per year. Something to keep in mind. But the actual inflation, because the government wants you to think it's lower, is actually closer to 5 or 10%, just based on my experience. And a better indicator of inflation is probably the stock market. On average, the stocks market goes up 10%. However, all of those numbers are fudged, so you can't really trust anything. Now we're going to give everything the benefit of doubt, and we're going to say there's an actual inflation rate of 5% and you're getting a raise of 3%. That gives you about 2% of inflation per year that you have to fight against. So that means in 36 years, you're going to need $4 million. So you're going to want to get $4 million at, say, the age of 50. Well, your average income for IT is going to be $35,000 to $50,000 a year. Living expenses, well, let's say you manage to pull off $24,000 a year in the city or whatever. And your income tax, if you're in Canada, it's probably going to be 30%. And this is going to be increasing because of inflation and raise of 3%. And the tax brackets don't actually change very often. So it's just another way for the governments and middlemen to take more away from you. So good luck retiring early. You're going to have to embrace stoicism and try to avoid hedonism. Yeah, it's pretty glue. Anyway, if you can get side income, that's going to allow you to retire earlier because side income is typically going to be something that you do on the side and you're not going to be dependent on an employer. And it's also something you're going to enjoy more. Whereas a job, it's always going to be mostly unenjoyable. If you can tap into that stoicism and make your job enjoyable to yourself, well, I think you're ahead of a lot of people out there. So that's another good way to do it. You can say, screw all of this retirement stuff and just go into the philosophy and try to find meaning as a serf or whatever. So getting your first jobs, you need experience but have none. Hooray. Apply, apply, apply. Now, when you're starting off, or maybe you're mid-career or whatever, you can lie. You can lie about your experience. You can lie about your education. Nobody really checks that these days anyway. So you got your first job. You lied on your resume or your interview or whatever. Hooray. It worked. And you're going to need some people skills for this because you got to keep up this lie. And you can keep lying, right? But it's going to cause a lot of stress because you have to remember your lies and well, you're not actually as skilled as you say you are. You're not actually experienced as you say you are. And you're going to be like running around, working your ass off or whatever, left, right, and center, trying to compensate for this. So you're going to be, say, running a data center and you've never touched the server in your life. Most people do this route in IT, and that's why a lot of IT people have a really bad rep. When you lie, you're going to have to BS your way out of stuff, especially when people start to question you. So I don't recommend it. You're going to spend more time lying than learning or working, so you'll end up without skills at the end of the day, and your career can only go so far. Or say you get to like, your VP of IT or whatever, you're way, way, way up there, and you have like no skills. Well, eventually, it'll come crashing down eventually. Or perhaps your people skills are good enough and it might not come crashing down. That's up for you. You're probably going to be switching jobs quickly because you don't want people to find out that you actually can't do your job or whatever, and that you're just chatting away at the water cooler type thing. So you can do lying. It requires a lot of people skills. It requires a lot of effort. In today's day and world, lying is the way that most people do it. And yeah, welcome to communism. So you can also go to honesty route. This is more long term. So to get a job when you're honest, well, you got to just be like, I am inexperienced, but I'm willing to learn. And maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe someone will see this is a good person, they're humble, whatever. You might get a job. You might. Now, while you have no work experience, you might have done something in the past. So while you're young, while you have time, maybe you're looking for a job, you're going to want to and program some more. Because while you're programming, you're learning, you're actually developing your skills. And something you may be doing is developing a portfolio. So say you've made a bunch of websites just on your spare time. They don't actually have to do anything. They can look pretty or whatever. You want to build up your libraries or whatever. You have a portfolio. And with a portfolio, well, you might be more likely to get hired. Unfortunately, resumes are a bit outdated, so you're not really going to translate that well on a resume, but you can freelance. And once you're freelancing well, that's experience. Um, you might have to lie a bit about that when you're freelancing, because if you're freelancing, you're probably going to be out of work for a couple months at a time. So you can be like, oh, I freelanced for 10 years, when in reality, well, of those 10 years, you only worked like a month per year or whatever. That's quite common with freelancing. So that could be like, something in between lying and honesty. Now, a bit about me. It took me 550 job applications when I was about 19 years old, and it wasn't until my 54th job interview that I actually managed to get a job. And I basically only got the job because they had someone like quit that day and they needed someone to go drive around on the truck or whatever and pick up stuff and whatnot. So that's what I did for probably the first 2 months. And I spent maybe an hour a day if I was lucky processing used electronics and then, selling them on online platforms. Eventually from there, my career went and I just pointed out things, do this, do that. It's kind of stupid if you don't do this, etc. Because efficiency is something that really bugs me. If it's not efficient, well, it's really bugging me. So, um, when you're honest, you're more likely to develop real wealth, which is skills, what you can do with your hands. You're not busy trying to come up with excuses or whatever. You're not busy trying to remember what you lied about, and you're not busy wasting your time doing basically diddly squat. That's what it is at the end of the day. So, when you're honest, you're more likely to get hired for your skills. And in order to do that, you need to be the best. So be the best. Support versus programming. So I'm mainly a programmer, but you got to do support when you got to do it. You got to do what you got to do. However, to get a job in support, you do need experience, and support experience will actually help you quite a bit in any position because support experience is people skills and it's just general experience. So if you do like IT support, it will actually help you get a programming job, unless the person hiring you is like really a stubborn, maybe academic or whatever. So what support unfortunately requires a job and job experience. So you can start programming now while you're young. Maybe you're 14, still in school. Screw school, you don't really need it. Just start programming now. Nobody cares about high school diplomas. Just start programming now. You can drop out even. I wish I dropped out. Anyways, the real solution, unfortunately, is you have to be a cheap bastard and do it yourself, do it yourself, do it yourself. Do everything yourself. Your skills are real wealth, and nobody can steal them from you. While you're at it, avoid middlemen. Plumbing is easy, electrical is easy, all of that is very, very easy. It's essentially like screwing in a light bulb, and you're paying people hundreds of dollars because you don't know how to screw in a light bulb. Learn to do it yourself, learn your real skills, and don't get caught using your skills because the government does not want you to do this. They don't want you to use your real skills. They want you trapped in the system so that you're dependent on them. So, something to keep in mind at the end of the day, someone's got to do the work, and when no one's doing the work, nothing's going to. Anyways, at the end of the day, if nothing's getting done, then well, you're all screwed, society-wise, your life-wise, etc. You got no food because nobody's doing any farming or whatever. Nobody's doing anything. Your computers are all broken because I don't know, you got incompetent people programming or whatever, and you got bugs out, and you got no electricity because no one's actually shoving coal or whatever into the generators, yada yada. You get the ideas. At the end of the day, someone's got to do the work. You can work smarter, you can work harder, but you can't just dick around at the end of the day. Anywho, that's basically it for this video. Please subscribe. This is the Hot Noob IT channel, I guess. I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/hotnoob.